He found a frozen door buried in ice where no structure should exist, and what waited behind it would expose a secret powerful enough to change the world forever. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind screamed across the Alaskan tundra like something alive and angry, cutting through layers of thermal gear as if they were tissue paper. Jake Morrison had been guiding wilderness expeditions for 12 years, and he'd learned to read the land the way some people read faces. Right now, the land was telling him to turn back. But Jake had never been good at listening to warnings. At 34 years old, with a beard frosted white from his own breath and eyes the color of glacier ice, he looked like he belonged out here in the emptiness. Maybe that's because he did. Civilization had never felt like home. Not since his father disappeared 23 years ago on what was supposed to be a routine research expedition into these very mountains. They'd called it an accident, equipment failure, tragic but unavoidable. Jake had been 11 years old, standing in a too-big suit at a memorial service for a body they never found. His mother had moved them to Seattle within a month, desperate to escape the cold that had taken her husband. But Jake had eventually returned, drawn back to Alaska like a salmon to its spawning ground, searching for answers in the ice and stone. Today's solo trek wasn't official business. His last tour group had been 3 weeks ago, a family from Texas who'd wanted to see the northern lights and complained about the cold the entire time. He'd dropped them at the airport in Fairbanks, pocketed his fee, and immediately planned this trip into the Brooks Range. There was a valley he'd heard about from an old Inupiat hunter named Samuel, a place the locals avoided. Samuel had mentioned it over whiskey one night, his weathered face serious in the firelight. "Strange things up there," he'd said. "The ice doesn't sit right. Animals won't go near it. My grandfather said the mountain swallowed something it wasn't supposed to, and the land's been sick ever since." Jake had pressed for details, but Samuel had just shaken his head and poured another drink. That conversation had been 6 months ago, and Jake hadn't been able to shake it. Now, pushing through knee-deep snow with the temperature hovering around -20 degrees Fahrenheit, he was beginning to understand Samuel's reluctance. The valley spread before him like a wound in the earth, steep walls of rock and ice rising on either side, the floor a maze of pressure ridges and crevasses. His GPS showed nothing but wilderness for 50 miles in every direction. No roads, no settlements, no infrastructure of any kind. He'd left his snowmobile 2 miles back where the terrain became too unstable, and now he moved on snowshoes, each step deliberate and careful. The afternoon sun, weak and distant, cast long shadows across the ice. Jake stopped to check his bearings, pulling out his compass and map. Something felt off. The temperature had dropped suddenly, at least 10 degrees in the last 15 minutes, and the wind had shifted direction 3 times. His instincts, honed by over a decade in the backcountry, were screaming at him. He was about to turn back when he saw it. At first, he thought it was just another ice formation, a trick of light and shadow. But as he moved closer, his heart began to pound. Rising from the glacier like a gravestone was a rectangular outline, too perfect to be natural. The ice around it had a different texture, almost like it had been disturbed and refrozen. Jake approached slowly, his breath coming faster now, fogging his goggles. He pulled them up and blinked hard, making sure he wasn't hallucinating from the cold. But it was still there. A door. A massive steel door, at least 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, embedded in the face of a glacial wall. The metal was a dull grey, covered in a thin layer of frost, but clearly manufactured. There were no markings, no handles on the outside, nothing to indicate what it was or who had put it there. But the most disturbing detail was this. Around the base of the door, the snow had been recently disturbed, boot prints partially filled in by blowing snow but still visible. Someone had been here, recently. Jake's mind raced. This was impossible. He was in one of the most remote regions of Alaska, miles from any known installation. The nearest research station was over 80 miles south. There were no mining operations up here, no military bases, nothing. And yet here was a door, industrial and deliberate, built into the ice like it had always belonged there. He pulled off his glove and touched the metal. It was cold, obviously, but not as cold as it should be. There was warmth coming from somewhere behind it. His fingers found a seam, a thin line running along the edge. He traced it down to the snow line and began digging with his hands, then with his ice axe. 3 feet down, he found it. A recessed panel, covered in ice but clearly mechanical. He chipped away the ice carefully, revealing a numeric keypad, old-fashioned, like something from the 1980s or 90s. Most of the numbers were faded, but it was still intact. Jake sat back on his heels, his mind spinning. Every survival instinct told him to photograph this, mark the coordinates, and get back to civilization. Report it to someone. The authorities, the Park Service, anyone. But another part of him, the part that had spent 23 years wondering what really happened to his father, wouldn't let him walk away. He pulled out his satellite phone to take photos, but the screen flickered and died. Full battery that morning, now completely dead. He tried his backup GPS unit. Same thing, dead. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Electronic interference. Something behind that door was powerful enough to kill his equipment. He should leave. He knew he should leave. Instead, he studied the keypad. Someone had been here recently, which meant someone knew the code. He tried the obvious combinations first. 0000-1234-9999. Nothing. Then, on impulse, he tried a number that had been burned into his memory since childhood. 0715, July 15th, his father's birthday. The keypad beeped. Something deep inside the ice groaned, a sound like a sleeping giant turning over. Jake scrambled backward as the door shuddered, ice cracking and falling away in sheets. Then, with a hiss of pressurized air, it swung inward, revealing darkness beyond. Emergency lights flickered on, one by one, illuminating a corridor that descended into the glacier at a steep angle. The walls were smooth concrete, the floor fitted with metal grating. Condensation dripped from pipes running along the ceiling. The air that rushed out was stale but breathable, tinged with the smell of machine oil and something else, something chemical he couldn't identify. Jake stood at the threshold, every rational thought screaming at him to walk away. This was trespassing at minimum, possibly a federal crime. This could be a classified military installation. But the code, his father's birthday, that couldn't be coincidence. He thought of his father's face, the way he'd looked the last time Jake saw him. They'd been standing in the driveway of their old house in Anchorage. His father had ruffled his hair and said, "Take care of your mother for me, buddy. I'll be back before you know it." But he never came back. And now, 23 years later, a door in the ice had opened to his birthday. Jake pulled out his flashlight, the old-fashioned kind that didn't rely on batteries that could be drained by whatever was causing the interference. He clicked it on and stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind him. He spun around, but there was no interior handle, no keypad, just smooth metal. His heart hammered against his ribs. Okay, don't panic. There had to be another way out. He turned back to the corridor and began to descend. The emergency lights ran along the floor like a runway, leading him deeper. The temperature rose as he went down, climbing from well below zero to something almost comfortable. 50 feet down, the corridor leveled out and opened into a larger space. Jake stopped, his flashlight beam sweeping across what looked like an entry station. There were lockers along one wall, a decontamination shower, and a security checkpoint with a desk and monitors. Everything was powered on, green lights blinking on equipment panels. But there was dust. Not a lot, but enough to show that no one had been here in at least days, maybe weeks. He approached the desk slowly. A logbook sat open, the last entry dated 3 weeks ago. Final evacuation complete, station sealed per Protocol 7. All personnel accounted for. God help us if anyone finds this place. Jake's hands trembled as he read the words again. 3 weeks. This place had been active 3 weeks ago. He flipped back through the pages. Entries going back months, then years. scientific notations, personnel rosters, supply deliveries. All of it written in careful handwriting, all of it suggesting this facility had been operational for a very long time. At the back of the station, another door stood partially open. Beyond it, Jake could see corridor lights stretching into the distance. He moved through, his footsteps echoing on the metal floor. The facility opened up before him like something from a science fiction film. Corridors branched in multiple directions, signs on the walls pointing to different sections. Research Lab A, Habitation Module, Data Center, Hydroponics, Generator Room. This wasn't some abandoned bunker. This was a full-scale underground research station, and it was massive. Jake chose the corridor marked Research Lab A and followed it deeper. The walls here were lined with windows looking into sealed laboratories. He pressed his face to the glass of the first one and felt his breath catch. The lab was pristine, equipment gleaming under fluorescent lights that hummed softly. Computers sat on desks, screens dark but power lights blinking, whiteboards covered in equations and diagrams, and in the center of the room, a glass containment unit holding what looked like ice core samples, each one labeled and dated. Some of the dates went back 40 years. Jake tried the door, but it was locked, requiring a keycard he didn't have. He moved to the next window, then the next, each lab revealing more mysteries. One contained climate modeling equipment sophisticated enough to make any university jealous. Another had atmospheric analysis tools. A third was filled with biological specimens, plants and soil samples preserved in vacuum-sealed containers. The fourth lab made him stop cold. Through the window, he could see a wall covered in photographs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all showing the same thing: the Arctic landscape, the glaciers, the ice sheets. But they were arranged chronologically, and even from this distance, Jake could see the change. The ice retreating year by year, the land emerging from its frozen grip. And at the bottom of the wall, projections. Maps showing what the Arctic would look like in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. The images were devastating. Ice-free summers, coastal cities underwater, mass migration patterns drawn in red arrows across continents. Jake felt sick. This was climate data, real data, more comprehensive than anything he'd ever seen published. And it was hidden here, buried under a glacier in one of the most remote places on Earth. Why? Who would hide this? He moved on, his mind reeling. The corridor opened into a central hub, a large circular room with corridors branching off in 6 directions. In the center stood a holographic display table, inactive but clearly high-tech, years beyond anything commercially available. Jake circled it slowly, then noticed something on the far wall. A memorial plaque, brass and carefully polished. He approached it, his flashlight beam illuminating the engraved words, "In memory of those who sought the truth, Dr. Robert Chen, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Dr. James Morrison." Jake's knees nearly gave out. James Morrison, his father. His father's name was on a memorial plaque in a secret research facility buried under the Alaskan ice. His hand reached out, fingers trembling as they traced the letters of his father's name. Below the names was a date, March 7th, 1999, the year his father disappeared. But this said, "In memory," like they'd died here, like this facility had killed them. Jake's grief, buried for over 2 decades, came roaring back with a vengeance. His father hadn't died in an equipment failure. He'd been working here in this place on something important enough to memorialize, something important enough to hide from the entire world. Anger burned through the grief. Someone had lied to him, to his mother. They'd been told it was an accident, a tragic confluence of bad weather and bad luck. But his father had been here, working in a facility that clearly had resources, support, and funding. This wasn't some small research outpost. This was major. He spun around, looking at the corridors branching off the hub. One was marked living quarters, another archives, a third director's office. He chose the archives. If there were answers about what his father had been doing, they'd be there. The archive room was smaller than he expected, lined floor to ceiling with filing cabinets and server racks. A single desk sat in the center with a computer terminal. Jake approached it and tapped a key. The screen flickered to life, no password required. A simple interface appeared. "Welcome to Station 7 Research Archive. Please select search parameters." Jake typed with shaking fingers. "James Morrison." The screen filled with files. Dozens of them, spanning from 1995 to 1999. Research papers, field notes, video logs, personal journals. Jake clicked on the first video log. The screen shifted, and suddenly he was looking at his father's face. Younger than Jake remembered, maybe 35 years old, wearing a fleece pullover and sitting in what looked like a small office. The timestamp read March 1st, 1999, 6 days before the date on the memorial plaque. "Log entry 73, his father's voice came through the speakers, and Jake's eyes burned with tears. He hadn't heard that voice in 23 years. "We've confirmed the atmospheric readings. Carbon levels are accelerating faster than any public model predicted. At the current rate, we're looking at a 2.5 degrees Celsius increase within 30 years, not 50. The ice core data supports this. We've tried to publish, but every attempt has been blocked at the federal level. Dr. Chen believes we're being actively suppressed, and I'm starting to agree." His father rubbed his face, exhaustion clear in every line. "The technology we've developed here could help. The carbon sequestration process works. We've proven it in lab conditions. Scaled up, it could buy humanity decades, maybe longer. But they won't let us share it. The energy sector, the government contractors, they're all invested in the status quo. They've made it clear that if we go public, this facility gets shut down and we all get buried along with the research." He leaned closer to the camera, his expression intense. "If you're watching this and I'm not around to explain it myself, then something went wrong. Everything we've discovered is in the archives. The climate data, the technology specifications, all of it. Someone needs to get this information out. The world needs to know what's coming and that we had a solution." The video ended. Jake sat frozen, his father's last words echoing in his mind. They'd had a solution. Technology that could fight climate change, and someone had buried it, literally and figuratively. He opened another file, this one a research paper titled Atmospheric Carbon Sequestration via Catalytic Ice Crystallization. The science was beyond him, but the abstract was clear enough. His father and his team had discovered a way to use modified ice crystals to pull carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a rate hundreds of times more efficient than trees. It was revolutionary, world-changing, and it had been hidden away for over 20 years. Jake clicked through more files, piecing together the story. Station 7 had been established in 1978 as a joint climate research facility, funded through black budget programs and kept off the books. For years, it had operated legitimately, gathering data and conducting research. But in the early 1990s, the team had started making discoveries that powerful interests didn't want made public. The true rate of climate change, the real timeline before catastrophic effects, and worst of all, a potential solution that would undermine trillions of dollars in fossil fuel investments. The facility had been slowly strangled, funding cut, personnel reassigned, until finally, in 1999, it had been shut down entirely, but not before something had gone wrong. Jake found the incident report buried in a subfolder. March 7th, 1999. An accident in the deep labs. A prototype carbon sequestration reactor had malfunctioned, causing a catastrophic release of pressurized gases. 3 researchers had been in the containment area: Dr. Robert Chen, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and Dr. James Morrison. Their bodies had been recovered and buried in a sealed section of the facility, too contaminated to be safely removed. The official story, the one fed to families, had been sanitized. Equipment failure in the field, bodies lost to the glacier, clean, simple, a lie. Jake pushed back from the terminal, his chest heaving. His father had died trying to save the world, and someone had covered it up. Had let his mother believe he'd been careless, that he'd made a mistake. The truth was so much worse and so much better. His father had been a hero, and Jake was standing in his tomb. A sound echoed through the facility, distant but distinct. a metallic clang like a door closing. Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. He wasn't alone. Someone else was here. He killed the computer screen and grabbed his flashlight, clicking it off. In the darkness, he could hear his own heartbeat, loud as thunder. Another sound, closer now. Footsteps on metal grating, slow and deliberate, moving through the corridors toward the archive. Jake looked around desperately. The archive had only one entrance, the door he'd come through. He was trapped. The footsteps stopped just outside. A shadow fell across the frosted glass window in the door. A voice, female, cautious. "I know someone's in there. I saw the terminal light." Jake's mind raced. He could hide, wait them out. Or he could confront whoever this was. He thought of his father, of the truth buried in this place. He'd come too far to hide now. "I'm coming out," he called. "I'm not armed." He clicked on his flashlight and opened the door. Standing in the corridor was a woman, maybe 40 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore thermal gear similar to his, and in her hand was not a weapon, but a tablet computer. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice carrying a mix of suspicion and desperation. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" "My name is Jake Morrison," he said carefully. "I found the entrance door, used a code. Who are you?" Her expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across her face. "Morrison, as in Dr. James Morrison?" Jake's throat tightened. "He was my father." The woman lowered her tablet slightly, her posture softening. "My God, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. Your father and my father worked together. Dr. Robert Chen." Jake's mind flashed to the memorial plaque. The 3 names. "Your father died here too." "Yes," she said quietly. 23 years ago, along with yours and Dr. Mitchell. I was 17 when it happened. I've spent the last 2 decades trying to find out the truth." "You've been here before," Jake said, pieces clicking together. "The boot prints outside, the recent log entry about evacuation. That was you." Sarah nodded. "I found this place 8 months ago, got access through my father's old security codes. I've been documenting everything, trying to preserve the research before someone decides to destroy it all." "The log said evacuation," Jake pressed. "Who else was here?" Sarah's expression darkened. "A skeleton crew. 3 researchers who'd been maintaining the facility in secret, continuing the work. But 3 weeks ago, they got word that the facility was compromised, that someone in the government knew it was still active and was sending a team to permanently seal it. So they left," Jake finished. "They evacuated and left everything behind." "Not everything," Sarah said. She turned and started walking, gesturing for him to follow. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." Jake hesitated only a moment before following her through the corridors. She moved with familiarity, someone who'd spent months learning this place. They passed through the central hub, down a corridor Jake hadn't explored yet, and stopped at a heavy door marked Deep Lab, authorized personnel only. Sarah pulled out a keycard and swiped it. The door unlocked with a heavy thunk. Beyond was a stairwell, descending even deeper into the ice. "The accident that killed our fathers happened down here," Sarah said as they descended, "in the prototype testing chamber. But what they never told anyone was that the prototype actually worked, right up until the moment it catastrophically failed." They reached the bottom, and Sarah led him into a massive chamber carved from the bedrock beneath the glacier. In the center stood a structure that looked like something between an industrial freezer and a rocket engine, all tubes and containment vessels and monitoring equipment. "The carbon sequestration reactor," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the vast space. "They shut it down after the accident and classified everything. But I've been going through the data. The technology works, it really works. Scaled up across the Arctic, this could sequester gigatons of carbon per year." Jake stared at the machine, understanding dawning. This could actually reverse climate change. "Not reverse," Sarah corrected, "but stabilize. Buy us time. Maybe enough time to transition to clean energy before it's too late. She walked to a control panel and pulled up screens of data. I've spent months verifying their research. It's all sound. This isn't theoretical. This is real, proven science. Then why hasn't anyone used it? Jake demanded. Why is it still buried down here? Sarah turned to face him, her expression grim. Because the initial cost would be in the hundreds of billions, because it would require international cooperation on a scale we've never achieved. And because if this technology existed and worked, it would prove that governments and corporations have known about climate change for decades and actively suppressed solutions. The lawsuits alone would bankrupt entire industries. Jake felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about his father anymore. This was about the future of the entire planet. We have to get this out, he said. We have to tell people. I know, Sarah agreed. That's why I've been copying everything to encrypted servers, research data, video logs, all of it. But I needed time, and now we're out of it. What do you mean? Jake asked. Sarah walked to another monitor and pulled up what looked like a security feed. The image showed the exterior of the facility, the door they'd both come through, and approaching it, visible even through the blowing snow, were vehicles, military vehicles. They're here, Sarah said quietly. The containment team. They're going to seal this place permanently, probably with us inside if they find us. Jake's blood ran cold. How long do we have? Minutes, Sarah said. She was already moving, pulling a hard drive from the control panel. I need to finish the upload, get the last of the data to my off-site servers, but the satellite uplink is on the surface level, and they're coming in through the main entrance. Is there another way out? Jake asked. Sarah nodded. Emergency exit tunnel, comes out about half a mile from the main door. But it's unstable, hasn't been maintained in years, and we'd have to leave now. Jake looked at the reactor, at the research data scrolling across screens, at everything his father had died trying to protect. 23 years this secret had been buried. If they sealed it now, it might never see daylight again. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. How long to finish the upload? Jake asked. Sarah checked her tablet. 15 minutes if the connection holds. Then we finish it, Jake decided. We didn't come this far to leave the truth buried. Sarah met his eyes, and he saw in them the same determination he felt. They were both their father's children, and they'd been given a chance to complete what their fathers had started. The upload station is this way, Sarah said, already moving. They ran through the corridors, their footsteps echoing off metal and concrete. Behind them, distant but growing closer, Jake could hear other sounds. Boots on metal grating, voices calling out commands. The containment team was inside. They reached the communications room at a dead sprint, Sarah's keycard barely registering before she shoved the door open. The room was smaller than Jake expected, lined with server racks and dominated by a large satellite dish control system. Banks of monitors showed data streaming in real time, and in the corner, a progress bar crawled across a screen. Upload 62% complete. How is it uploading if they're already inside? Jake asked, his chest heaving. I started it before I found you, Sarah said, her fingers flying across a keyboard. But the connection keeps dropping. The ice interferes with the signal, and they probably have jamming equipment. She pulled out the hard drive she'd grabbed from the deep lab and connected it to another port. This is the critical stuff, the reactor specifications, the proof that it works. If we can just get this uploaded. A crackling sound came through speakers mounted on the wall. Then a voice, distorted by static but unmistakably authoritative. Attention, any personnel remaining in Station 7. This is Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Air Force. This facility is being decommissioned under national security protocol. You have 5 minutes to identify yourselves and exit through the main entrance. After that time, all access points will be permanently sealed. Sarah's face went pale. 5 minutes. The upload needs at least 10. Jake looked around the room desperately. His eyes landed on a fire suppression panel. What happens if we trigger the emergency systems? Would that slow them down? It might, Sarah said, but it would also kill power to non-essential systems, including this upload. What about essential systems? Jake pressed. Is there a way to reroute power, make the upload essential? Sarah's eyes widened. The environmental controls. If we tie the upload to the life support monitoring system, it becomes essential. They can't shut it down without killing power to the entire facility. She was already moving, pulling open an access panel beneath the main console. Help me, we need to splice these connections. Jake dropped to his knees beside her, holding his flashlight while she worked with wire cutters and electrical tape. Her hands were steady despite the situation, the practiced movements of someone who'd spent months learning this facility's systems. My father used to say that the truth was like water, Sarah said as she worked, her voice tight. You can dam it up, redirect it, try to contain it, but eventually it finds a way through. She connected 2 wires and taped them quickly. He died believing that. I need to believe it too. He was right, Jake said, thinking of his own father's video log. They've been trying to bury this for 23 years and we're still here, still fighting. The overhead lights flickered. Somewhere in the facility, heavy equipment was being moved. The 5-minute deadline was ticking down. Sarah made the final connection and scrambled back to the keyboard. She typed rapidly, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the monitors. Come on, she muttered. The upload progress jumped to 71%, then 73%. It's working! We're getting through! The speaker crackled again. 4 minutes. Be advised, we are authorized to use force if necessary. Exit now. They're bluffing, Sarah said, though she didn't sound convinced. They can't risk damaging the facility. There's too much volatile equipment down here. Jake wasn't so sure. He'd seen the determination in military operations before, the willingness to accept collateral damage for a strategic objective. What happens if they do seal us in? How long could we survive? The facility has its own air recycling system, powered by geothermal, Sarah said, not looking away from the screen. Food stores for maybe 2 months, water indefinitely from melting ice. We could survive. But we'd be trapped, Jake finished. And eventually, they'd come back. Dig us out or leave us here permanently. Sarah's jaw tightened. Then we make sure the upload finishes. Because if this data gets out, if the world knows what's down here, they can't just bury it again. 81%, 84%. The progress bar crept forward with agonizing slowness. Jake stood and moved to the door, peering through the small window into the corridor beyond. He could see lights now, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, moving systematically through the facility. They were searching every room, every corridor. It was only a matter of time before they reached the communications room. Sarah, he said quietly, we need a backup plan. If they get here before the upload finishes, it'll finish, she insisted. 89%. A new sound echoed through the facility, the grinding of heavy machinery. The main entrance door was being sealed with industrial equipment. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. They were really doing it, permanently closing Station 7. The emergency exit, Jake said. Where exactly is it? Sarah pulled up a schematic on one of the monitors without pausing her work on the upload. Sub-level 2, maintenance section. It's a tunnel that runs horizontal for about half a mile before angling up to the surface. But like I said, it's unstable. Parts of it are flooded with meltwater. The structural integrity is questionable. Better than being sealed in, Jake said. He studied the schematic, memorizing the route. How do we access it? There's a blast door. Requires 2 keycards activated simultaneously. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a card on a lanyard. I have one. The other should be in the director's office. 93%. The speaker crackled again, but this time the voice was different. Younger, urgent. Colonel, we've got active power signatures in the communications room. Someone's using the satellite uplink. A pause, then Colonel Webb's voice, cold and sharp. Shut it down. Cut power to that section immediately. Sir, the system is showing the uplink tied to environmental controls. If we cut power— I said shut it down, Lieutenant. Whatever they're uploading, we can't let it complete. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard. They're going to cut us off. I need to compress the remaining data. Send it all at once. It's risky. The connection might not handle the bandwidth, but it's our only shot. Do it, Jake said. She initiated the compression protocol. The upload speed spiked, the progress bar jumping. 95, 97, 98. The lights in the room flickered. Somewhere, someone was working to isolate their power supply. Come on, Sarah whispered. Just a few more seconds. 99%. The lights went out. The monitors went dark. For a heartbeat, the room was completely black and silent. Then emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. The monitors rebooted, and Sarah let out a shaky breath. Upload complete, she said, her voice cracking with relief. It's out, all of it. The research, the reactor specs, the video logs. I sent it to 3 separate servers in different countries. Even if they find one, the others will still have it. Jake felt something loosen in his chest, a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. His father's work wouldn't die here. The truth would survive, even if they didn't. But they weren't done yet. The emergency exit, he said. We need to move now. Sarah was already disconnecting her equipment, shoving hard drives into her pack. The director's office is 1 level up. We can get the second keycard and make it to the exit before they lock down the whole facility. They burst out of the communications room and into the corridor. The emergency lighting turned everything into stark shadows and blood-red highlights. Alarms began to wail, a piercing sound that echoed off the metal walls. Automated systems, probably triggered by the power disruption. They ran toward the central hub, but as they rounded a corner, Jake skidded to a halt. 3 figures in military tactical gear stood at the far end of the corridor, night vision goggles pushed up on their helmets. For a frozen moment, everyone stared at each other. "Freeze!" one of the soldiers shouted. "Hands where we can see them!" Jake grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her backward, around the corner. "Run!" They sprinted in the opposite direction, taking a different corridor. Behind them, boots pounded on metal grating. Orders were being shouted. The soldiers were giving chase. "This way," Sarah gasped, pulling Jake through a door marked Maintenance Access. They found themselves in a narrow service corridor, pipes and conduits running along the walls and ceiling. It was barely wide enough for them to move single file. They squeezed through, the space tight and claustrophobic. Behind them, they could hear the maintenance door being forced open. The soldiers were following, but the narrow space would slow them down. The service corridor opened into a vertical shaft with a ladder running up the center. Sarah went first, climbing rapidly. Jake followed, his arms burning as he pulled himself up rung by rung, 1 level, then another. They emerged into a section of the facility Jake hadn't seen before, offices and living quarters, abandoned and gathering dust. "Director's office is this way," Sarah said, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She led him through a maze of cubicles to a corner office with a door marked Director Arthur Brennan. The door was locked, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and smashed the window beside the door, reaching through to unlock it from the inside. They tumbled into the office. It was larger than Jake expected, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a wall of commendations and photographs. Sarah went straight to the desk, yanking open drawers. It should be here. Brennan would have kept it close. Jake helped her search, pulling open cabinets and checking shelves. Time was running out. He could hear the soldiers spreading through the facility, their voices echoing through the ventilation system. "Got it," Sarah said, holding up a keycard identical to hers. "Let's go." They headed for the door, but Jake paused. On the wall, among the photographs, was one that made him stop cold. It showed a group of researchers standing in front of Station 7's entrance, back when it was new. His father was there, young and smiling, standing next to a man Jake assumed was Robert Chen, and beside them, a woman with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a bun. The nameplate beneath read, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. But it was the background that caught Jake's attention. Behind the group, partially visible in the photograph, was someone else. A man in a military uniform, his face turned away from the camera, but his posture familiar. Jake grabbed the photo off the wall and looked closer. "Sarah," he said slowly. "Who was in charge of Station 7's security back in the 90s? She paused at the door. "I don't know. Why?" "Because I think whoever it was might be the same person trying to seal us in here right now." Before Sarah could respond, the office window exploded inward. A canister bounced across the floor, spewing thick white smoke. Tear gas. Jake grabbed Sarah's hand and they ran, eyes already burning, lungs seizing. They crashed through the door and into the corridor, gasping and coughing. The smoke billowed out behind them, filling the hallway. Through his watering eyes, Jake could see soldiers emerging from the smoke, gas masks on, weapons drawn. They were cut off from the route back to the emergency exit. "Alternate route," Sarah choked out. "Service elevator. This way." They ran blindly, following her lead. The elevator was old, industrial, the kind used for moving heavy equipment. Sarah slammed the button, and the doors creaked open. They stumbled inside, and she hit the button for sub-level 2. The elevator descended with painful slowness, groaning and rattling. Through the metal grate door, they could see floors passing. Emergency lights strobed. The alarm continued its relentless wailing. "They'll be waiting for us when we reach the bottom," Jake said, wiping his eyes. "They know where we're going." Sarah nodded, thinking fast. "There's a maintenance access at sub-level 1. We can take the service corridors the rest of the way. It'll be slower, but harder for them to follow." The elevator shuddered to a halt at sub-level 1. The doors opened to reveal an empty corridor. Too empty. Jake's instinct screamed danger. They stepped out cautiously, Sarah leading them to a service panel in the wall. She pried it open, revealing a crawl space lined with pipes and wiring. "Through here. It connects to the maintenance section." Jake went first this time, pulling himself into the narrow space. It was tight, barely room to crawl. Behind him, he could hear Sarah following. The metal was cold against his hands, and water dripped from condensation on the pipes. They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jake's shoulders ached, his knees were bruised, and his lungs still burned from the tear gas. But they kept moving. Finally, the crawl space opened into a larger area. Jake dropped down into what looked like a pump room, machinery humming around him. Sarah landed beside him, and they took a moment to catch their breath. "The emergency exit is through there," Sarah said, pointing to a heavy door on the far side of the room. "Blast door. We both use our key cards at the same time, and it should open." They approached the door together. It was massive, reinforced steel designed to withstand catastrophic pressure. 2 card readers were mounted on either side, spaced far enough apart that one person couldn't reach both. "On 3, Sarah said, positioning herself at one reader. Jake took the other. 1, Sarah counted. Jake heard footsteps above them in the corridor they'd avoided. The soldiers were still searching. 2. He looked at Sarah, this woman he'd met less than an hour ago, who'd spent months trying to honor her father's legacy, the same way Jake had spent years searching for answers about his. 3. They swiped the cards simultaneously. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of hydraulics, the blast door began to open. It moved slowly, sliding into the wall inch by inch. The gap widened. 1 foot, 2 feet. "Come on," Jake urged, as if he could make it move faster through sheer will. 3 feet, 4 feet, wide enough to slip through. "Go," Sarah said. "I'll follow." Jake squeezed through the opening, emerging into a tunnel carved from ice and rock. Emergency lighting ran along the floor, illuminating a path that stretched into darkness. The air was colder here, and he could hear the sound of running water somewhere ahead. Sarah came through behind him and immediately turned back to the blast door controls. "I'm going to close it. Buy us time." She hit a button and the door began to grind closed, but before it could seal, something wedged into the gap. A rifle barrel shoved through from the other side. "No!" Sarah slammed her fist on the controls, but the door's safety mechanism had engaged. It wouldn't close on an obstruction. The rifle barrel was withdrawn, and hands appeared in the gap, forcing the door back open. Soldiers poured through, 6 of them, led by a man in an officer's uniform. He removed his helmet, revealing a face weathered by decades and hard choices. Colonel Marcus Webb. "Dr. Chen," he said calmly, as if they were meeting in an office instead of an underground tunnel. "Mr. Morrison, this has gone on long enough. You need to come with us." "The data's already out," Sarah said defiantly. "We uploaded everything, the reactor specs, the research, all of it. You can't bury it anymore." Webb's expression didn't change. "I know you attempted an upload. Our cyber team is already working to contain it. Your servers will be seized, the data scrubbed. This will all be classified under national security." "You can't scrub data from 3 different countries," Sarah shot back. "And even if you could, copies exist. People will know." "People know lots of things, Dr. Chen," Webb said wearily. "Doesn't mean they believe them. Doesn't mean anything changes." He gestured to his men. "Take them into custody, carefully. No harm comes to them." The soldiers advanced. Jake grabbed Sarah's arm. "Run!" They bolted deeper into the tunnel, splashing through puddles of icy water. Behind them, Webb shouted orders, and the soldiers gave chase. The tunnel was narrow enough that the soldiers couldn't easily use their weapons without risk of hitting each other in the confined space. That was something, at least. The path sloped upward, then downward, following the natural contours of the rock and ice. Water ran in streams along the floor, and in places, the ceiling dripped steadily. Sarah had been right about the tunnel's instability. Jake could see cracks in the ice walls, places where the structure looked ready to collapse. They ran past side tunnels and service alcoves, following the main path marked by the emergency lights. Jake's legs burned, his breath came in gasps, but he didn't slow down. Behind them, the soldiers were falling back slightly, hampered by their gear and the difficult terrain. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, some kind of staging area with equipment racks and storage containers. But it was what lay beyond that made Jake's heart sink. The tunnel continued, but 30 feet ahead, it was flooded. Water filled the passage from floor to ceiling, dark and impenetrable. "The meltwater," Sarah said, horror in her voice. "It's worse than I thought. The tunnel must be completely submerged from here on." Jake looked around desperately. There had to be another way. But the chamber was a dead end, the only exit the flooded tunnel. The soldiers emerged from the tunnel behind them, weapons raised. Webb walked forward slowly, his expression almost sympathetic. "It's over," he said quietly. "There's nowhere left to go. Please, come peacefully. You'll be detained, debriefed, and released. You have my word." "Your word," Sarah said bitterly. "Like the word given to our fathers that their research would be used to help people. Like the word that their deaths were accidents." Webb had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I wasn't in command then. I was just a lieutenant. But I've read the files. I know what happened. And I know that your fathers died believing they were doing the right thing." "They were doing the right thing," Jake said, his voice shaking with anger. "They found a way to save the planet, and people like you buried it." "It's more complicated than that," Webb began. "It's really not," Sarah interrupted. "You're following orders from people who value profits over survival. People who'd rather let the world burn than lose their fortunes." Webb's jaw tightened. "I'm a soldier. I follow orders. That's how the system works." "The system is broken," Jake said, "and you know it." For a moment, something flickered in Webb's eyes. Doubt, maybe, or regret. But then he shook his head. "Nevertheless, you're coming with us. Sergeant, secure them." The soldiers moved forward. Jake backed up until he felt the cold stone wall behind him. Sarah stood beside him, her hand finding his. They'd run out of options. Then Jake felt it. Air movement. Just a whisper coming from behind him. He turned his head slightly and saw it. A crack in the wall, barely visible but wide enough to slip through. And beyond it, he could see faint light. Another tunnel, one not marked on any schematic. He squeezed Sarah's hand twice, a signal. Her eyes flicked to the crack, and she gave the smallest nod. "You don't have to do this," Jake said to Webb, buying time. "You could let us go. Tell your superiors we escaped. The data's already out there. This doesn't change anything." "It changes whether you spend the rest of your lives in a secure facility," Webb said. "I'm trying to help you. Cooperate, and this can still end without anyone getting hurt." Jake glanced at Sarah. She gave a tiny nod. They moved together, diving for the crack in the wall. Jake went through first, the stones scraping his jacket, Sarah right behind him. Shouts erupted from the soldiers. They emerged into a natural ice cave, irregular and rough, nothing like the manufactured tunnels of the facility. The faint light Jake had seen came from above, filtering down through layers of ice. Sunlight. They were close to the surface. "This way," Sarah gasped, pointing to where the light was strongest. They scrambled up a slope of loose ice and rock, hands and feet searching for purchase. Behind them, soldiers were trying to follow through the crack, but their tactical gear made it difficult. They were buying precious seconds. The slope grew steeper, turning into an almost vertical climb. Jake's fingers were numb, his muscles screaming, but he kept climbing. Sarah was beside him, her face set with determination. They pulled themselves over a final ledge and found themselves in a narrow crevasse open to the sky. The walls of ice rose on either side, but there was a path, a steep climb that led upward toward daylight. What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Jake and Sarah didn't pause to celebrate. They climbed, feet slipping on ice, hands raw and bleeding. The crevasse narrowed as they ascended, forcing them to squeeze through gaps barely wide enough for their bodies. But the light grew brighter, the air fresher. Finally, they pulled themselves over the edge and onto the surface of the glacier. The sun was setting, painting the ice in shades of orange and gold. The wind hit them immediately, brutal and cold, but they'd made it. They were out. Jake turned to help Sarah up the last few feet, and they collapsed together on the ice, gasping for breath. For a moment, they just lay there, staring at the vast sky above. Then Sarah started laughing. Not humor, but relief. The kind of laughter that comes when you've survived something impossible. Jake joined her, and they lay on the ice. Two people who'd gone into a frozen mountain as strangers and emerged as allies, laughing at the sheer absurdity of being alive. But their relief was short-lived. From the crevasse behind them came sounds of pursuit. The soldiers were still coming. "We need to move," Jake said, pulling himself to his feet. He helped Sarah up, and they looked around, getting their bearings. The glacier stretched in all directions, a wilderness of ice and snow. Jake recognized the formation in the distance, the same one he'd used to navigate on his way in. His snowmobile was still parked 2 miles to the east, assuming it hadn't been found. "Can you make it 2 miles?" he asked Sarah. She nodded, her jaw set. "Lead the way." They started moving, half running, half stumbling across the uneven ice. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, and with it, the temperature was dropping rapidly. Without proper shelter, they'd freeze long before they could reach civilization. Behind them, figures emerged from the crevasse. 4 soldiers, with Webb in the lead. They were trained for this terrain, equipped with proper gear. They'd catch up quickly. Jake pushed harder, his legs pumping, lungs burning in the cold air. Beside him, Sarah kept pace, her thermal gear similar enough to his that she could handle the temperature, for now. They crossed a snowfield, leaving obvious tracks. There was no way to hide their trail. The best they could hope for was to stay ahead long enough to reach the snowmobile. 20 minutes of brutal running brought them to a ridge. Below, Jake could see his snowmobile still parked where he'd left it. Relief flooded through him. "There," he gasped, pointing. They scrambled down the ridge, sliding more than climbing. Jake reached the snowmobile and immediately began brushing snow off it, checking the engine. "Please start," he thought. "Please." He turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. "No, no, no," Jake muttered, trying again. Sarah looked back toward the ridge. They're coming. Jake pumped the primer, whispered a prayer, and turned the key again. This time the engine caught, roaring to life. He'd never heard a more beautiful sound. "Get on!" he shouted over the noise. Sarah swung on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Jake gunned the throttle, and they took off across the snow, the machine's tracks digging into the powder. He drove like a madman, following the route he'd taken on the way in, but in reverse. The snowmobile bounced over ridges, sprayed snow as it turned. Behind them, he could see lights in the growing darkness. The soldiers had vehicles too, probably parked near the facility's main entrance. They'd be giving chase soon. But Jake knew this terrain. He'd guided tours through here for years. He knew shortcuts the military wouldn't find on any map. He veered off the main route, taking them through a narrow pass between two peaks. The snowmobile barely fit, scraping against rock walls on either side, but it bought them distance from their pursuers. They emerged from the pass onto a long slope that descended toward the tree line. Civilization was still miles away, but they were getting closer. The snowmobile's headlight cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating their path. Sarah's grip around his waist tightened as they hit a rough patch, the machine catching air before slamming back down. Jake fought to keep control, his arms aching from the effort. An hour of hard driving brought them to the forest's edge. Jake slowed, navigating between trees now instead of across open ice. The cover would make them harder to track from the air if helicopters joined the search. Finally, when the snowmobile's fuel gauge was reading near empty and Jake's arms were shaking with exhaustion, he saw lights ahead. A cabin, one of the wilderness shelters maintained by the Park Service for emergencies. He pulled up to it and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost shocking after hours of mechanical noise and wind. They dismounted on shaky legs. The cabin was unlocked, as it should be. Jake pushed the door open and they stumbled inside. It was basic. A wood stove, bunks with blankets, emergency supplies, but it was shelter. Sarah immediately went to the stove and began building a fire with wood from the supply box. Jake barred the door and checked his pockets. His satellite phone was still dead, killed by whatever electronic countermeasures had been active at the facility. But his backup GPS unit flickered to life, far enough from the facility now to function. He checked their position. They were still 30 miles from the nearest town, Coldfoot. But there was a ranger station 15 miles south. If they could make it there by morning, they could get help. The fire caught, warmth beginning to fill the small space. Sarah sat in front of it, her hands stretched toward the flames. In the firelight, Jake could see how exhausted she was. They both were. "We should rest," he said. "A few hours. Then we push on to the ranger station at first light." Sarah nodded but didn't move from the fire. "Do you think the upload really worked? Or was Webb right about them scrubbing it?" Jake sat down beside her. "I don't know, but even if they scrubbed the servers, the data existed. People saw it, even if just for a few minutes. Screenshots were probably taken, files downloaded. That's how information works now. Once it's out there, it's almost impossible to completely erase." "Almost," Sarah said quietly. "Almost," Jake agreed. "But we did what we could. We got the truth out. What happens next is up to other people." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called out to the night. "Your father would be proud," Sarah said suddenly, "of what you did today, of who you are." Jake's throat tightened. "Yours too." "They died trying to save a world that didn't want to be saved," Sarah said. "I used to be so angry about that. But today, continuing their work, I understood. It's not about whether the world wants it. It's about doing what's right anyway." Jake nodded. "My mom used to say my dad was chasing ghosts in the ice. After he died, I thought maybe she was right. But he wasn't chasing ghosts. He was chasing hope." "And we found it," Sarah said, managing a small smile. $100 million hope buried under a glacier." They both laughed, the sound tired but genuine. As the night deepened and exhaustion finally overcame adrenaline, They took turns keeping watch and resting. Jake stared into the fire during his watch, thinking about everything that had happened. 23 years of questions answered in a single day. His father had been a hero, and somehow, in trying to uncover that truth, Jake had become part of something bigger than himself. He thought about the reactor in the deep lab, the technology that could change everything. Would it ever see the light of day? Or would it remain buried, another casualty of political expediency and corporate greed? He didn't know. But he knew that he and Sarah had fought for it, had risked everything to give it a chance. Sometimes that was all anyone could do. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah woke and joined him by the dying fire. "Ready?" she asked. Jake stood, his body stiff and sore but his mind clear. "Ready." They stepped out into the cold morning air. The snowmobile had just enough fuel to get them most of the way to the ranger station. After that, they'd walk if they had to. As Jake started the engine one more time, he looked back toward the mountains, toward the glacier that held Station 7 and all its secrets. Somewhere under all that ice, his father's body lay in a sealed chamber. He would probably never be able to bring him home, never give him the burial he deserved. But maybe this was enough. Maybe telling his story, finishing his work, was the memorial that mattered. Sarah climbed on behind him, and they set off through the forest. The sun rose higher, warming the frozen world around them. And despite everything, despite the danger they were still in and the uncertain future ahead, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in 23 years. Peace. The ranger station appeared through the trees like a mirage, a small log structure with a green Forest Service sign half buried in snow. Jake cut the snowmobile's engine 50 yards out, letting momentum carry them the last bit of distance. The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with possibility and danger. "Wait here," Jake said quietly, dismounting. "Let me make sure it's safe." Sarah nodded, her face pale with exhaustion and cold. They'd been running on adrenaline and determination for hours, and both reserves were nearly depleted. Jake approached the station cautiously, scanning for any sign of military presence. But the parking area held only 2 vehicles, a Forest Service truck and a battered Subaru with local plates. Through the windows, he could see 2 rangers inside, one young woman bent over paperwork, an older man pouring coffee from a thermos. Normal. Blessedly normal. Jake knocked on the door, and both rangers looked up in surprise. The older man, his name tag reading Kowalski, opened the door with a concerned expression. "Son, you look half frozen," Kowalski said. "Get in here. Sarah, there's someone with me. She needs help too." Sarah appeared from behind the snowmobile, and the female ranger, whose tag read Martinez, immediately grabbed blankets from a supply closet. Within minutes, they were seated by a space heater, wrapped in wool blankets, holding cups of hot coffee. "What happened?" Kowalski asked. "You 2 get caught in the storm last night? We had reports of severe conditions moving through the high country." Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. How much should they say? Too little, and they wouldn't get the help they needed. Too much, and they might not be believed. "We were hiking in the Brooks Range," Jake began carefully. "Got turned around, had to shelter overnight. But we need to make some calls. It's urgent." Martinez frowned. "Cell service is spotty out here, but we've got a satellite phone and a radio. What kind of urgent are we talking about?" "The kind where we need to contact the media," Sarah said, her voice stronger now that warmth was returning to her body. "Major news outlets, as soon as possible." Both rangers stared at them. Kowalski set down his coffee slowly. "You 2 in some kind of trouble? Because if this is a domestic situation or—" "No," Jake interrupted. "Nothing like that. We've uncovered something important, about climate research that's been suppressed for over 20 years. Kowalski and Martinez exchanged skeptical glances. Jake could see it in their faces. They thought he and Sarah were conspiracy theorists, survivalists, or worse. "Look," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. It was still dead, but she removed the SD card from the back. "I have proof, photos, documents. If you have a computer here, I can show you. Then you'll understand." Martinez hesitated, then gestured to a laptop on the desk. Sure. Why not? Sarah inserted the SD card and pulled up the files. The first image was a photograph of the reactor in the deep lab, massive and unmistakable. The second was a scan of a classified document with government seals clearly visible. The third was a still frame from one of the video logs, showing Dr. James Morrison's face mid-sentence. Kowalski leaned in closer, his skepticism fading. What am I looking at here? Station 7, Sarah said. A secret climate research facility buried under the glacier 40 miles north of here. My father and Jake's father both worked there in the 90s. They developed technology that could reverse atmospheric carbon accumulation. The government buried the research and let our fathers die to keep it secret. The words sounded insane even as she said them, but the evidence on the screen was undeniable. Martinez scrolled through the images, her expression shifting from doubt to shock. "This can't be real," she whispered. "A facility like this would require massive infrastructure. We'd know about it." "It was built in the late 70s, Jake said. Black budget program, completely off the books, and it's still there. We were just inside it last night." Kowalski straightened up, his face serious. "If what you're saying is true, this is way above our pay grade. We need to contact—" "The media first," Sarah insisted. "If we go through official channels, this gets classified again, buried again. The only way to protect this information is to make it public before anyone can stop us." Martinez looked at her partner. Some wordless communication passed between them. Then Kowalski nodded slowly. "All right, you can use the satellite phone, but I'm staying on the line, and if this turns out to be some kind of hoax, you're both looking at federal charges for misuse of emergency equipment." "Fair enough," Jake said. Sarah pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket with a phone number written on it. "This is a journalist I trust, Elena Vasquez, New York Times. She's covered environmental stories before, and she won't fold under pressure." She dialed the number on the satellite phone. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, professional and slightly hurried. "Vasquez. Miss Vasquez, my name is Dr. Sarah Chen. You don't know me, but I have information about a classified government facility conducting climate research. Information that's been suppressed for over 20 years. A pause. "Dr. Chen, I get a lot of calls like this. What makes yours different?" "I have documentation, video evidence, eyewitness testimony, and I'm calling from a Forest Service station in Alaska because the military is currently trying to prevent this information from going public." Another pause, longer this time. When Vasquez spoke again, her voice was sharper, more focused. "Tell me everything, and I mean everything." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah laid out the entire story while Jake filled in details. The discovery of the door, the facility, the reactor technology, the memorial plaque with their fathers' names, the upload of data to secure servers, the chase through the ice tunnels, their narrow escape. Vasquez interrupted occasionally with pointed questions, the kind that told Jake she was taking this seriously. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence. "The data you uploaded," Vasquez finally said. "You said 3 servers in different countries. Do you have access credentials I can verify?" Sarah rattled off URLs and login information. Jake could hear typing on the other end of the line. "I'm in," Vasquez said, her voice tight with excitement. "I'm looking at what appears to be classified Department of Energy documents dated 1978 through 2003. And video files, lots of video files." "That's it," Sarah said. "That's Station 7. "This is bigger than a single article," Vasquez said. "This is Pulitzer territory, but I need more. I need corroboration, other sources. Can you get me in contact with the researchers who evacuated the facility 3 weeks ago?" Sarah's face fell. "I don't have their contact information. They cleared out completely. I don't even know their real names." "What about military personnel? You said a Colonel Webb was leading the containment team." "Colonel Marcus Webb, U.S. Air Force," Jake confirmed, "but he's not going to talk to you." "Maybe not voluntarily," Vasquez said, "but if I start asking questions about Station 7 through official channels, it'll force a response. Even if that response is no comment, it confirms the facility exists." "They'll bury you in classification orders," Sarah warned. "National security gag orders. They'll make it impossible for you to publish." "Let them try," Vasquez said, and Jake could hear the steel in her voice. "I've fought these battles before. The Times has lawyers who live for this stuff. You just gave me the biggest climate story since the Paris Accords, and I'm not letting it go." Relief washed over Jake. They'd done it. The information was in the hands of someone who could actually do something with it. "One more thing," Vasquez said. "I need you both on record. Full names, backgrounds, willingness to go public as sources. This story needs faces, personal narratives. Are you prepared for that?" Jake looked at Sarah. Going public meant no anonymity, no protection. It meant painting targets on their backs for anyone who wanted this story buried. But staying silent meant letting their father's sacrifice mean nothing. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "We're prepared." "Same here," Jake added. "Good. Stay by this number. I'm going to verify what I can in the next few hours and start writing. This goes live tomorrow morning, front page, above the fold. The world's about to find out what the government's been hiding under the ice." She hung up. Jake and Sarah looked at each other, exhaustion and exhilaration mixing in equal measure. Kowalski cleared his throat. "So, that all really happened? Everything you said?" "Every word," Jake confirmed. "Then you two need protection," Martinez said. "If the military's after you, they could show up here any minute." As if on cue, the radio on the desk crackled to life. A voice, distorted by static but recognizable as Colonel Webb, came through. "Forest Service Station 12. This is Air Force Search and Rescue. We're tracking 2 individuals who may be in your area. Male, mid-30s, and female, early 40s. They're wanted for questioning regarding a security breach. Have you had any contact?" The 4 of them froze. Kowalski reached for the radio, but Martinez grabbed his hand. "If we report them, they disappear," she said quietly. "Black site, no trial, no story. Everything they just told us gets buried." Kowalski's jaw worked. Jake could see the conflict on his face, duty versus conscience. "We're federal employees," Kowalski said. "We have an obligation to protect and serve the public," Martinez interrupted. "And the public deserves to know the truth about this. You saw those documents. That technology could save millions of lives." The radio crackled again. "Station 12, please acknowledge. This is a priority search." Kowalski looked at Jake and Sarah, then at the laptop screen still showing images of the reactor. Finally, he picked up the radio. "Search and rescue. This is Station 12. We've had no contact with any hikers in the last 12 hours. Station is secure. Over." A pause. "Acknowledged, Station 12. Maintain vigilance and report any sightings immediately. Out." Kowalski set down the radio and let out a long breath. "I just lied to the military. I could lose my job for this. Hell, I could go to prison." "You did the right thing," Sarah said softly. "And I promise you, when this story breaks, the world will know it." "In the meantime," Martinez said, "we need to get you two somewhere safer. This station is too exposed. There's a hunting cabin about 10 miles south, privately owned, but the owner's in Arizona for the winter. I have a key. You can hole up there while we figure out next steps." "We can't ask you to risk any more than you already have," Jake protested. "You're not asking," Kowalski said gruffly. "We're offering. Martinez is right. This is bigger than regulations or chain of command. If what you're saying is true, this is about the future of the planet." 2 hours later, Jake and Sarah were settled in the hunting cabin, a rustic but well-maintained structure with a wood stove, canned goods, and most importantly, distance from any main roads. Martinez had driven them there in her personal vehicle, taking back roads to avoid any military checkpoints. "Stay low," she'd said before leaving. "Don't use the radio or make any calls unless it's an emergency. We'll check on you in 24 hours after Vasquez's story breaks. Once it's public, you'll be safer." Now, with night falling again and the cabin's windows covered, Jake and Sarah sat at a rough wooden table reviewing everything that had happened. It felt surreal, like a dream or nightmare they couldn't wake from. "Do you think they'll come after our families?" Sarah asked quietly. "Try to pressure us through them?" Jake had been wondering the same thing. My mother's in Seattle. Remarried, different last name. They'd have to dig to find her. What about you? No family, Sarah said. My mother died when I was young. Never married, no kids. I've spent most of my adult life chasing this mystery. She smiled sadly. Guess I finally caught it. And now we wait, Jake said, but waiting proved harder than running. Every sound outside made them tense. Every creak of the cabin's old timbers sounded like footsteps. They took turns sleeping, the other keeping watch by the window with a hunting rifle they'd found in a locked cabinet. Neither of them knew much about using it, but the weight of it was comforting. Dawn came slowly, grey light filtering through the covered windows. Jake was on watch when his satellite phone, which had finally recharged using a solar charger from the cabin, buzzed with an incoming message. It was from an unknown number. Story is live. Check NYT homepage. Your national news. Stay safe. EV. Jake's hands shook as he pulled up the New York Times website on his phone. The headline dominated the screen in large, bold letters. Classified climate facility discovered in Alaska. Suppressed technology could have prevented decades of warming. Below it, a subheading. Secret Station 7 housed breakthrough carbon sequestration research. Government buried findings for 23 years. And there, in the byline photo grid, were their faces. Sarah from her university ID photo, and Jake from his wilderness guide license. They were named, quoted, their entire story laid out in meticulous detail. Sarah, Jake called, wake up, we're famous. She stumbled over, still half asleep, and her eyes widened as she read the article. Vasquez had done an incredible job, weaving their personal stories with the technical details of the research, the political implications, and the human cost. She'd even managed to get a no comment from the Department of Defense, which only made them look guilty. The article included photographs from Sarah's upload, the reactor, the facility, the memorial plaque with their father's names, video stills from the logs, scanned classified documents with government seals clearly visible. Look at the comments, Sarah said, scrolling down. There are already thousands of them. The response was overwhelming, some skeptical, demanding more proof, but many more expressing outrage, demanding investigations, calling for the technology to be declassified and implemented immediately. Environmental groups were already organizing protests. Scientists were weighing in, some confirming the theoretical validity of the carbon sequestration process. Within hours, the story had spread beyond the Times. Every major news outlet was covering it. Cable news ran segments with talking heads debating the implications. Social media exploded with hashtags, #Station7, #ClimateJustice, #TruthInIce. By mid-morning, the political response began. A senator from Alaska called for immediate hearings. The EPA administrator demanded access to the facility. Environmental organizations filed Freedom of Information Act requests. The story was too big to bury, spreading too fast to contain. Martinez arrived at noon with supplies and news. You two have caused quite a stir, she said, unloading groceries. The military's pulled back from the area. Too much media attention now. But you've got reporters camping out at the ranger station, demanding to know where you are. Are we safe to leave? Jake asked. Safer than yesterday, Martinez said. But I'd give it another day or two. Let the furor build. The more public this gets, the harder it'll be for anyone to make you disappear quietly. That evening, Sarah's phone rang. An actual call, not a text. She answered cautiously. Hello? Dr. Chen, this is Senator Margaret Walsh from Alaska. I'm calling to request your testimony before a Senate committee investigating Station 7 and the suppression of climate research. Sarah's eyes widened. She put the call on speaker. Senator Walsh, I'm honored, but I'm not sure what I could add beyond what's already in the article. Dr. Chen, you can add the human element. You can put a face to this tragedy. Your father and Mr. Morrison's father died in service to this research. The American people need to hear that story directly from you. Walsh paused. And frankly, we need your technical expertise to understand the reactor technology. If this sequestration process is viable, we need to know if it can be scaled up and implemented. Jake leaned toward the phone. Senator, this is Jake Morrison. What guarantees do we have that testifying won't result in classification orders or criminal charges? You have my word, Walsh said firmly, and I'm working on legislation that would provide whistleblower protections specifically for this case. The President's own science advisor has expressed interest in reviewing the Station 7 research. This is moving in the right direction, but we need your cooperation. Sarah looked at Jake. He nodded. We'll testify, Sarah said. Under one condition, the hearings are public and televised. No closed-door sessions, no classified briefings. Everything we know goes on the record where everyone can see it. Walsh didn't hesitate. Agreed. I'll have my staff coordinate logistics with you. Thank you, Dr. Chen, Mr. Morrison. You're both doing a tremendous service to your country and to the world. After she hung up, Jake and Sarah sat in stunned silence. We're going to testify before Congress, Sarah finally said. Our father's work is going to be heard, Jake added. After 23 years, someone's finally listening. That night, unable to sleep despite their exhaustion, they sat by the fire and talked. About their fathers, about the years of searching and wondering, about what came next. Even if they implement the technology, Sarah said, it'll take years to scale up, maybe decades. The damage already done won't be reversed overnight. But it's a start, Jake said. And it's more than we had yesterday. More than we've had for 23 years. Sarah nodded, staring into the flames. I keep thinking about what my father wrote in his last log entry. Someone needs to get this information out. He never thought it would be his daughter. Never thought it would take this long. But it got out, Jake said. That's what matters. We finished what they started. No, Sarah said softly. We just opened the door. Finishing it will take everyone. Scientists, politicians, activists, ordinary people who care enough to demand change. Our fathers started this. We continued it. But the real work is just beginning. Jake understood what she meant. Station 7 wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. The technology existed. The proof was undeniable. But transforming that knowledge into action would require sustained effort from millions of people. So what do we do after the testimony? He asked. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. We keep fighting. We work with researchers to validate and improve the sequestration process. We pressure governments to fund implementation. We make sure our fathers didn't die for nothing. Sounds like a lifetime commitment, Jake observed. Sounds like a purpose, Sarah corrected. Outside, the wind had died down. Through a gap in the window covering, Jake could see stars emerging in the clear night sky. Somewhere to the north, buried under tons of ice and stone, Station 7 waited. A monument to human ingenuity and human greed, to sacrifice and suppression. But not anymore. Now it was a beacon, a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the surface. Jake thought about his father's last words in the video log. Someone needs to get this information out. Well, Dad, he thought, someone did. And across the table, Sarah was probably thinking something similar. Two children of lost researchers, brought together by a frozen door in the wilderness, who'd given the world a chance it didn't know it had. The story was far from over. The battles ahead would be fierce, the opposition well-funded and determined. But for the first time in 23 years, the fight was happening in the light instead of the shadows. And that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since the New York Times broke the story that shook the world. 6 months of congressional hearings, scientific conferences, and endless media interviews. 6 months of Jake and Sarah becoming faces of a movement they never asked to lead but couldn't abandon. Now, standing in front of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, Sarah adjusted the microphone and looked out at the packed gallery. Every seat was filled. Cameras lined the back wall. Outside, protesters held signs reading "Climate Justice Now" and "Station 7 Saves Lives." "Madam Chair," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 6 months ago, Jake Morrison and I discovered a secret that had been buried for over 2 decades. Today, I'm here to tell you that secret doesn't have to stay buried any longer. She clicked a remote, and behind her, a massive screen lit up with an image of the carbon sequestration reactor. The gallery murmured, "This is not theoretical technology. This is not a pipe dream. This reactor, built by my father Dr. Robert Chen and Dr. James Morrison in 1998, successfully sequestered atmospheric carbon at rates 300 times more efficient than natural processes. It worked. They proved it worked. And then it was classified and hidden because it threatened the wrong people's profits." Senator Walsh leaned forward. "Dr. Chen, can you explain in layman's terms how this technology functions?" Sarah nodded. "Imagine ice crystals, but modified at the molecular level to attract and trap carbon dioxide molecules. When these modified crystals are dispersed at high altitudes, they pull CO2 from the atmosphere as they form and fall. The carbon becomes locked in the ice structure. As the ice melts in controlled collection facilities, the carbon is extracted and either stored permanently or converted into stable compounds." "And this can be scaled up?" another senator asked. "According to my father's calculations, a network of 20 dispersal stations across the Arctic could sequester 5 gigatons of carbon annually. That's roughly 15% of global emissions. Combined with emissions reductions, it could stabilize atmospheric carbon levels within a decade." The gallery erupted in applause. The committee chair gavelled for order. "Dr. Chen, what would implementation cost?" Sarah took a breath. This was the hard part. "Initial estimates suggest $150 billion for the full network. Annual operating costs around $20 billion. Gasps from the gallery. A few senators shook their heads. "That's an enormous sum," one senator said skeptically. "It is," Sarah agreed. "It's also less than 1/10 of what the United States spends annually on defense. And the cost of not implementing it? Climate disasters already cost the global economy over $300 billion a year. That number is rising. This technology isn't expensive. Inaction is expensive." Jake sat in the front row of the gallery, watching Sarah handle the questioning with a grace he couldn't have managed. She'd transformed over these 6 months from a quiet researcher into a force of nature. Her testimony was going viral in real time, clips already spreading across social media. When it was his turn to speak, Jake approached the microphone with less polish but equal conviction. "Senators, I'm not a scientist like Dr. Chen. I'm a wilderness guide. I know ice and snow and survival, but I also know what it means to lose someone to a lie." His voice caught slightly. "My father died thinking his work mattered, that it would help people. Instead, it was buried, and he was forgotten. But 6 months ago, we made a choice to stop letting powerful people decide what truth the world deserves to know." He looked directly at the camera. "Station 7 exists. The technology works. And every day we debate instead of act, we're making the same choice that killed my father and Dr. Chen's father. We're choosing profits over people, politics over survival. I'm asking everyone watching to choose differently." The silence that followed was profound. Then Senator Walsh spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Morrison, Dr. Chen, this committee commits to you today that Station 7 will not be forgotten again. We will be introducing the Climate Innovation and Truth Act, which will declassify all research from the facility, provide federal funding for scaling up the sequestration technology, and establish protections for climate researchers against corporate retaliation." The gallery exploded in applause. Jake looked at Sarah and she nodded, tears in her eyes. It wasn't everything. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. After the hearing, they were mobbed by reporters. Jake had learned to navigate these scrums over the past months, but he still found them exhausting. Sarah fielded technical questions while Jake handled the personal angle, the human story that made the science resonate. "Mr. Morrison, how does it feel to vindicate your father's legacy?" a reporter called out. Jake paused, considering. "It doesn't feel like vindication. It feels like completion. Like I finally got to finish a conversation we started when I was 11 years old. He asked me to take care of things while he was gone. It took 23 years, but I think I finally did that." That clip would be played on every news channel by evening. They escaped to a quiet coffee shop near the Capitol, Sarah's new attorney running interference with the press. Inside, they collapsed into a booth, both exhausted. "Is it always going to be like this?" Jake asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Probably," Sarah said. "At least until the novelty wears off, or until the next crisis pushes us out of the headlines." "You say that like it's a bad thing." Sarah smiled. "Part of me misses anonymity. The other part knows this platform is the only reason anything's actually happening." She was right. Their faces had become synonymous with the climate justice movement. Universities were already developing curricula around Station 7. A documentary crew had been following them for months. There was talk of a feature film, though both of them had refused to option those rights. "Elena called while you were testifying," Sarah said, checking her phone. "The Department of Energy is officially requesting access to Station 7. They want to begin extracting the reactor for study." Jake's chest tightened. "They're going back in?" "With our supervision. We'd be part of the team." Sarah looked up. "Jake, we could see it again, see what our fathers built, make sure it's treated with the respect it deserves." The thought of returning to that frozen tomb filled Jake with conflicting emotions. But Sarah was right. They couldn't let Station 7 become just another government program, stripped of its meaning and humanity. "When do they want to go?" he asked. 2 weeks. They're assembling a team now. Scientists, engineers, military escort for security." She hesitated. "Colonel Webb requested to be part of the security detail." Jake's jaw tightened. Webb, the man who'd chased them through ice tunnels, who'd tried to bury the truth. Why would he want to help? "According to Eleanor, he's been reassigned. New orders are to facilitate full disclosure and ensure historical preservation of the site. Apparently, he specifically requested this assignment." "People don't change that fast," Jake said skeptically. "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But orders do. And right now, orders are on our side." 2 weeks later, Jake found himself back in Alaska, standing in front of the same glacial wall where he'd discovered the frozen door 7 months earlier. But this time, he wasn't alone. A full expedition team surrounded him. Scientists from 5 countries, engineers, military personnel, and enough media to document every moment. The door had been fully excavated now, the ice cleared away to reveal the full structure. It was even more impressive in daylight, a testament to engineering and secrecy. Colonel Webb approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Morrison, Dr. Chen, thank you for agreeing to guide us in." Jake studied him. The colonel looked older than he had 6 months ago, the weight of recent events aging him. "Why did you request this assignment?" Webb was quiet for a moment. "Because I was wrong. I followed orders I should have questioned. I tried to bury something that deserved to be celebrated. I can't undo that. But I can help protect it going forward." "Pretty words," Jake said. "True words," Webb corrected. "I've read your father's complete logs, all of them. They were trying to save the world, and I was part of the machine that crushed them for it. Let me help make that right." Sarah placed a hand on Jake's arm. "We need all the help we can get. If the colonel's offering, we should accept." Jake nodded slowly. Forgiveness was hard, but pragmatism was necessary. The expedition into Station 7 was nothing like Jake's first desperate exploration. Now, every corridor was lit, every system activated and monitored. Scientists spread through the facility like archaeologists at a dig site, cataloging everything, treating each discovery with reverence. In the communications room where Sarah had uploaded the data, a team was now setting up a permanent satellite uplink. The facility would become a living museum and research station, never to be sealed again. Jake and Sarah led a group to the deep lab, to the reactor itself. When the massive chamber opened before the assembled scientists, the reaction was one of awe. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a climate scientist from Japan, approached the reactor with tears in her eyes. "My God," she whispered, "it's beautiful. Do you realize what this represents? Not just the technology, but the hope, the proof that we're capable of solving this." "My father spent 3 years perfecting this," Sarah said quietly. "He died believing no one would ever see it work." Then we honor him by making sure everyone does, Tanaka replied. Over the following weeks, the reactor was carefully dismantled and transported to a research facility in Anchorage. But not before they held a ceremony in the deep lab, standing before the memorial plaque with their fathers' names. Representatives from 3 environmental organizations spoke. A children's choir from Fairbanks sang. And Jake and Sarah, together, unveiled an addition to the plaque. Their work was hidden but never lost. Their sacrifice was buried but not forgotten. Their hope lives on in everyone who chooses truth over convenience and future over profit. Jake placed his hand on his father's name, the brass cool under his fingers. I wish you could see this, Dad. Wish you could know that it mattered, that you mattered. Sarah stood beside him, her hand on her father's name. I think they know. Somehow, I think they always knew someone would find it, would finish what they started. The media coverage of the ceremony was extensive, but it was the quiet moment after, when everyone else had left, that Jake would remember most. Just him and Sarah, standing in the silence of the deep lab, feeling the weight of everything their fathers had built and everything they themselves had become. You know what's strange? Sarah said. I spent 20 years obsessing over this mystery. It consumed my whole life. And now that it's solved, I don't feel empty. I feel like I'm just getting started. That's because it's not about the mystery, Jake said. It's about the meaning. And that doesn't end just because we found answers. 3 months later, the first prototype based on the Station 7 technology was tested over the Arctic Circle. Jake and Sarah watched from a research vessel as modified ice crystals were dispersed at high altitude. Within hours, atmospheric sensors showed measurable drops in localized CO2 levels. It worked. Just like their fathers had promised, it worked. The global response was immediate. The European Union pledged €40 billion to help fund a full-scale network. China announced plans to develop its own version of the technology. Even skeptical nations that had resisted climate action for decades were forced to reconsider in the face of undeniable proof. But success brought new challenges. Energy companies, threatened by technology that could reduce demand for fossil fuels, launched massive lobbying campaigns. Misinformation spread online, claiming the ice crystals were dangerous or that the whole thing was a hoax. There were even conspiracy theories that Station 7 had never existed, that Jake and Sarah were actors in an elaborate government scheme. They're desperate, Sarah said, reading through yet another debunking article she'd have to write. They know their time is running out. Let them be desperate, Jake replied. We have the truth, we have the science, and we have people who care. That last part proved most important. The movement that had grown around Station 7 had become something neither of them could have predicted. Young people especially had latched onto the story, seeing in it proof that individual courage could challenge systemic corruption. Station 7 became shorthand for hidden solutions to seemingly impossible problems. Environmental clubs named themselves after it. Artists created works inspired by it. A generation found hope in the story of 2 people who refused to let truth stay buried. 1 year after the initial discovery, Jake returned to Alaska alone. Not for media or science, but for himself. He hiked back to the valley where he'd first seen the frozen door, following the same route he'd taken that fateful day. The door was gone now, removed as part of the facility's transformation into a museum and research station. But the glacier remained, ancient and patient, holding who knew how many other secrets in its frozen depths. Jake stood where he'd stood before, remembering the fear and excitement of that moment, the decision to open the door instead of walking away. How different his life would have been if he'd chosen differently. His satellite phone rang, Sarah's number. Hey, he answered. How's Geneva? Intense. The UN Climate Summit is taking Station 7 seriously. They're talking about a global cooperative to fund sequestration networks worldwide. Her voice carried exhaustion and excitement. Jake, they're actually listening. Governments that have blocked climate action for decades are coming to the table. That's because of you, Jake said. The work you've done, the testimony, the research validation. You made it impossible to ignore. We made it impossible to ignore, Sarah corrected. I'm the scientist, but you're the heart. People connect with your story, with your father's story. That emotional connection is what breaks through the political barriers. Jake looked out at the glacier, at the mountains beyond. Do you ever wonder what they'd think of all this, our fathers? Would they be proud, or would they think we've turned their work into a circus? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think they'd be proud we didn't give up, that we fought for the truth even when it was dangerous. The circus, the media, the politics, that's the price of changing the world. They paid their price, we're paying ours. Worth it, though, Jake said. Worth it, Sarah agreed. After hanging up, Jake sat down on a rock and pulled out a letter he'd written but never sent. It was addressed to his father, pages of things he'd wanted to say over the years. Apologies for doubting, thanks for the example, pride in the work, love that had never faded. He read it aloud to the glacier, to the wind, to whatever part of his father's spirit might linger in this place. When he finished, he folded it carefully and placed it in a waterproof container. He buried it at the base of where the door had been, a message in a bottle for the ice. I finished what you started, Dad, he said quietly. Your work is out there now, helping people, changing things, just like you hoped it would. The wind carried his words away, up toward the peaks where clouds were gathering. It looked like snow was coming, fresh layers to add to the ancient ice, covering, preserving, holding. But this time, what was buried wouldn't stay hidden. This time, the truth had already escaped. 2 years after the discovery, the first full-scale sequestration station went online in Greenland. Jake and Sarah were there for the activation ceremony, along with scientists from 30 countries and environmental leaders from around the world. The station was massive, a technological cathedral built to their father's specifications but improved with modern innovations. As the first ice crystals were released into the atmosphere, monitoring stations across the Arctic began recording data. An hour later, the lead scientist approached with results. It's working at 112% of projected efficiency. We're sequestering carbon at rates that exceed the original Station 7 models. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake felt Sarah grab his hand, squeezing tight. They did it, she said through tears. Our fathers actually did it. We all did it, Jake replied. Everyone who refused to let this die. Everyone who fought to make it real. That night, at a reception in Nuuk, Jake gave a toast. He raised his glass to a room full of the world's leading climate scientists and political leaders, people who months ago would never have given him the time of day. To the researchers who had the courage to seek truth, he said. To the people who had the courage to believe them, and to the future we're building together, one crystal at a time. The room drank to that. And in that moment, Jake felt something he hadn't felt since he was 11 years old, watching his father drive away for the last time. He felt complete. The work wasn't done. It would never truly be done. Climate change was a challenge that would take generations to fully address. But they had tools now. They had hope. They had proof that human ingenuity, when freed from political constraints and corporate greed, could accomplish miracles. 5 years after opening the frozen door, Jake Morrison stood in front of a statue. It was bronze, larger than life, depicting 3 figures: Dr. Robert Chen, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and Dr. James Morrison. They stood together, looking toward the horizon, tools in their hands, determination in their faces. The statue was the centerpiece of Climate Hope Park in Anchorage, a memorial to all the researchers who'd worked on climate solutions over the decades. But these 3 held the place of honor, the pioneers who'd proven it was possible. Sarah stood beside him, now director of the Global Sequestration Initiative, overseeing the deployment of 70 stations across the Arctic and Antarctic. Her work had been nominated for a Nobel Prize. Jake had returned to guiding, but now he led climate education expeditions, showing people the science behind the solutions. His tours were booked years in advance. You know what I realized, Sarah said, looking up at her father's bronze face. We didn't just find their research, we found ourselves, who we were meant to become. Jake nodded. I spent my whole adult life searching for my father in the wilderness. Turns out, I needed to find myself first. A group of schoolchildren approached, their teacher explaining the statue. Jake and Sarah stepped back, letting them learn. One little girl, maybe 10 years old, looked up at the bronze figures with wide eyes. "Did they really save the world?" she asked her teacher. The teacher smiled. "They gave the world the tools to save itself. What we do with those tools is up to all of us." The girl noticed Jake and Sarah standing nearby. "Are you somebody important?" Jake and Sarah exchanged glances, both smiling. "No," Jake said gently. "We're just people who found something important and made sure it didn't stay lost." "That's the same thing," the girl said matter-of-factly and skipped away. Sarah laughed. "Out of the mouths of babes." As the sun set over Anchorage, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Jake thought about the journey that had brought him here. From a frozen door in the wilderness to standing before a monument to his father's legacy, from a lonely guide searching for answers to a man who'd helped change the world. Not bad for someone who'd just wanted to understand why his dad never came home. "You good?" Sarah asked, seeing the emotion on his face. "Yeah," Jake said. "Better than good. I'm exactly where I need to be." They stood together in the fading light, two people whose fathers had dreamed of saving the world, who'd finished that dream and were now living in the reality they'd helped create. The carbon levels were dropping, the ice was stabilizing. The future was uncertain, but no longer hopeless. All because someone had been brave enough to open a door, and stubborn enough to make sure what lay behind it changed everything. Anyone can change the world if they're willing to brave the cold, open the door everyone else walked past, and refuse to let truth stay frozen in the dark. As the northern lights began to dance across the Alaskan sky, Jake Morrison placed his hand one more time on his father's bronze shoulder, a son honoring a father, a guide who'd found his way home, and a man who'd learned that some doors, once opened, lead not just to the past, but to a future worth fighting for. Because for Jake, for Sarah, and for everyone who believed that courage still matters, the frozen door was never the end of the story. It was where everything finally began. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep discovering, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice.